The crystal champagne flute slipped from my fingers and shattered against the pristine brick patio as Ryan's words echoed across his grandmother's birthday party. "Sarah's a sweet girl, but let's be honest, Grandma Dot, she's just not sophisticated enough for our family's standards." 40 pairs of eyes turned toward me, some pitying, others relieved that someone had finally said what they'd all been thinking. The autumn breeze carried the scent of his mother's expensive roses, and the sound of uncomfortable murmurs from the Coleman family gathered around their matriarch's birthday celebration. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I should have been mortified, should have grabbed my purse and fled through the garden gate, like the ashamed working-class girl they expected me to be. Instead, I smiled and pulled out my phone. "You're absolutely right, Ryan," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent patio. "We should definitely talk about standards and sophistication. Grandma Dot, I think you'd be very interested to see just how sophisticated your grandson really is." I held up my phone, the screen glowing with text messages that would destroy everything Ryan thought he'd built. The Coleman family estate had always intimidated me, even after 2 years of dating Ryan. Standing there that September afternoon with broken glass at my feet and 43 members of the Coleman clan staring at me like I'd just announced I was joining the circus, I finally understood why. This wasn't just a house or even a family gathering. This was a fortress of old money and older expectations, and I had never been meant to breach its walls. Dorothy Coleman sat in her ornate wicker throne at the head of the long glass table, her silver hair perfectly coiffed despite the afternoon breeze. At 78, she commanded respect from every person on that patio, without raising her voice or making demands. She simply existed with the quiet authority of someone who had built an empire from scratch alongside her late husband, and expected everyone around her to live up to the standards they'd established. Her pale blue eyes, the same shade as Ryan's, had been watching me with polite interest during his impromptu speech about maturity and life choices. Now they were fixed on my phone with the sharp focus of a woman who had spent decades reading people and situations with surgical precision. Ryan's face had gone from confident to confused in the span of 3 seconds. He stood there beside the elaborate birthday cake his mother had ordered from the most expensive bakery in Millbrook Heights, his champagne glass frozen halfway to his lips. The late afternoon sun caught the golden highlights in his brown hair, the same hair I'd run my fingers through countless times while he whispered promises about our future together. He looked exactly like what he was, a privileged 24-year-old who had never faced real consequences for his actions, and couldn't quite process that someone was about to change that. "Sarah," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone he used when he was trying to manage a situation, "let's not make a scene at Grandma's party. We can talk about this later." But there wouldn't be a later, not the way he imagined it. I had spent 6 months watching him lie to my face while carrying on with Brittany Hayes, my former best friend from high school, who now spent her nights serving drinks at Murphy's bar downtown. 6 months of being told I was imagining things, being too sensitive, being paranoid. 6 months of feeling like I was losing my mind while he gasped my face and made me question my own reality. 6 months of being made to feel grateful for his attention while he gave the best parts of himself to someone else. The text messages on my phone told a different story than the one Ryan had been performing for his family. They told the story of hotel room meetups and lies about working late. They told the story of him mocking my attempts to fit into his world, while promising Brittany that she was everything I wasn't: spontaneous, fun, uncomplicated. They told the story of a man who kept me around for his family's approval, while seeking excitement elsewhere. "Actually," I said, taking a step closer to the birthday table where Dorothy sat surrounded by perfectly wrapped presents and fresh flower arrangements, "I think your family deserves to know exactly who they're supporting. Especially Grandma Dot, since she's always been so generous with her advice about relationships and family values." The late September air felt crisp against my skin as I unlocked my phone screen, scrolling to the folder I'd titled, Ryan's Real Life. Emma Rodriguez, my only remaining real friend, had helped me organize the evidence over the past 3 weeks, once I'd finally told her what I'd discovered. Emma, brilliant computer science major that she was, had taught me how to preserve screenshots and recover deleted messages from backup files. She'd also been the one to convince me that I deserved better than living in constant doubt and humiliation. Linda Coleman, Ryan's mother, made a small sound of distress from her position near the outdoor bar where she'd been arranging bottles of imported wine. She looked exactly like what she was. A woman who had spent her adult life perfecting the art of social appearances and could sense a disaster approaching from 50 yards away. Her manicured hands fluttered nervously around her pearl necklace as she exchanged glances with her husband Robert, who stood near the garden gate looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. "Sarah, honey," Linda said, her voice bright with forced cheerfulness, "why don't we go inside and get you cleaned up? You've got glass on your shoes." But I wasn't going anywhere. Not this time. For 2 years I had allowed myself to be managed, redirected, and made small in order to fit into their world. I had worked double shifts at Grind Coffee House to buy dresses appropriate for their dinner parties. I had studied etiquette videos on YouTube to learn which fork to use for the salad course. I had smiled politely when Ryan's college friends made jokes about dating townies, and pretended not to notice when conversations stopped when I entered rooms. All of that effort, all of that changing myself to become someone worthy of their acceptance, and Ryan had been treating our relationship like a placeholder while he explored other options. The worst part wasn't even the cheating itself. The worst part was the way he'd made me complicit in my own humiliation by convincing me that my suspicions were character flaws rather than rational responses to obvious lies. "Grandma Dot," I said, addressing the woman whose opinion mattered most to everyone on this patio, "Ryan talks about you all the time. About how you and Grandpa Coleman built this family on honesty and hard work. About how you taught him that a person's character matters more than anything else." Dorothy's expression hadn't changed, but something in her posture shifted slightly. She set down her own champagne glass and folded her hands in her lap, with the patience of someone accustomed to hearing difficult truths. "Go on, dear," she said quietly. Ryan moved closer to me, his hand reaching for my phone. "Sarah, stop. You're embarrassing yourself." I stepped back, keeping the device out of his reach. The movement brought me closer to Dorothy's chair, close enough to see the curiosity in her eyes. This was a woman who had raised 4 children and buried a husband, who had built a business and maintained a family legacy through decades of challenges. She wasn't someone who shied away from uncomfortable realities. 3 weeks ago, I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. I accidentally saw text messages on Ryan's phone while we were having dinner at Romano's downtown. Messages from Brittany Hayes, who used to be my best friend in high school. The murmur that went through the gathered family was immediate and uncomfortable. Several of Ryan's cousins exchanged glances while his Aunt Margaret visibly leaned forward in her chair to hear better. This was exactly the kind of family drama that the Colemans usually managed to avoid, or at least keep private. "Sarah," Ryan said again, his voice sharper now. "You're being ridiculous. Those messages were completely innocent." I looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw the panic beginning to creep into his eyes. For 2 years, he had been the one with all the power in our relationship. He had the money, the family connections, the social status that I lacked. He had been the one who decided when we spent time together, what we did, how serious our relationship would become. He had been in control of the narrative, able to shape reality to his advantage. Now, for the first time, I was holding something he couldn't take away, or explain away, or minimize. I was holding proof. "The first message I saw was from 3 weeks ago," I continued, turning my attention back to Dorothy. It said, and I quote, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow night at the Marriott. Sarah thinks I'm working late on the Henderson project, but the only project I want to work on is getting you out of that dress you wore to Murphy's last night." The silence that followed was complete and devastating. Even the birds seemed to stop singing in the perfectly manicured garden. Dorothy's face remained composed, but her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Ryan made a choking sound. "That's not... You're taking it out of context." "Am I?" I scrolled through my phone screen, finding the next screenshot. Here's another one from 2 weeks ago. "Sarah's so uptight about everything. She analyzes every word I say like she's looking for hidden meanings. You're so much more relaxed, so much more fun. Being with you feels like I can finally breathe." Linda Coleman sank into the nearest chair, her face pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. Robert moved closer to his wife, his business-trained expression revealing nothing but his eyes were hard as they focused on his son. I wasn't finished. 2 years of feeling inadequate, of questioning my own instincts, of being made to feel lucky for receiving scraps of attention from someone who was supposed to love me, had built up a reservoir of words that needed to be said. "And this one," I said, finding another message. "From just last week. The family party is going to be torture with Sarah there. She tries so hard to fit in, but she doesn't understand that you can't fake breeding. At least I know I'll have something to look forward to afterward when we meet at our usual place." Dorothy Coleman had not reached her age and position in life by avoiding difficult conversations or uncomfortable truths. She looked at her grandson with the same expression she probably used when reviewing financial reports that didn't add up. "Ryan James Coleman," she said, her voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. "Is this true?" Ryan looked around the patio as if hoping someone would rescue him from this moment. His sister Jessica, who had driven down from Cleveland for the party, was staring at him with undisguised disgust. His younger brother Kevin was recording the entire scene on his phone, probably already planning how to share this drama with his college friends. His parents looked like they were calculating the social damage and trying to figure out how to contain it. "Grandma, you have to understand," Ryan began, his voice taking on the pleading tone he used when he wanted something from the family matriarch. "Sarah and we're not really compatible. I was trying to find a way to end things without hurting her feelings." The laugh that escaped me was sharp and bitter. "Without hurting my feelings? You announced to your entire family that I'm not sophisticated enough for you. You made me feel like I should be grateful you were willing to be seen with me. And you've been cheating on me for 6 months while making me think I was paranoid for noticing the obvious signs." I turned to Dorothy, whose attention had never wavered from my face. "Mrs. Coleman, you've always been kind to me. You've included me in family dinners and asked about my classes and my job. You've treated me with—" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Respect even when others in your family haven't. I thought you deserved to know what kind of man your grandson really is." Dorothy's response was measured and devastating. "Ryan, is everything this young woman is saying accurate?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Ryan looked at his grandmother, then at his parents, then at the assembled family members who were all waiting for his answer. For a moment, I thought he might try to deny everything, might attempt to gaslight me one final time in front of his entire family. Instead, he deflated. The confident posture, the charming smile, the easy charisma that had attracted me in the first place, all of it disappeared as he realized that his carefully constructed image was crumbling in real time. "Grandma, I can explain," he said weakly. "Explain what, exactly?" Dorothy's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "Explain how you've been lying to this young woman. Explain how you've been conducting an affair while bringing her to family gatherings. Explain how you've been presenting yourself as one kind of person while behaving as another." The family members around the patio were silent, but their expressions spoke volumes. Ryan had always been the golden boy, the successful son who worked for the family business and dated appropriate girls, and made his grandmother proud. Now they were seeing him as something else entirely. "Mrs. Coleman," I said, putting my phone back in my purse, "I'm going to leave now. I just wanted you to know the truth before I disappeared from your lives forever. Thank you for 2 years of kindness. I'm sorry your grandson didn't inherit your integrity." I turned to walk away, my feet crunching on the broken glass from my champagne flute. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the continued silence. I had made it 3 steps toward the garden gate when Dorothy's voice stopped me. "Sarah, dear, wait a moment." I turned back to see the elderly woman rising from her chair with the dignity that had defined her entire life. She walked toward me slowly, her expensive shoes clicking against the brick patio, while 42 family members watched in fascination. When she reached me, she took my hands in hers. Her skin was soft and warm, aged but strong. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for having the courage to tell me the truth. That couldn't have been easy." Behind her, Ryan was trying to salvage something from the wreckage. "Grandma, please, let me explain what really happened." Dorothy didn't turn around. "Ryan, you've explained quite enough for one day." She looked back at me with something that might have been admiration. "You're a brave young woman, Sarah, and for what it's worth, I think my grandson was the one who wasn't sophisticated enough." That's when I knew that everything was about to change. Not just for me, but for Ryan, for his family, for the careful social structure they'd all worked so hard to maintain. The truth had a way of rearranging everything it touched, and I had just set it loose in their perfectly ordered world. The first time I saw Ryan Coleman was at a house party in my junior year of college, 3 months before I would graduate with a degree in English literature, and exactly 0 job prospects that didn't involve asking if customers wanted extra foam with their lattes. He was standing by the kitchen island holding a beer and laughing at something his friend had said, and the sound carried across the crowded room like music. Everything about him screamed money and confidence, from his perfectly fitted polo shirt to the way he held himself like someone who had never doubted his place in the world. I was there because my roommate Melissa had dragged me along, insisting I needed to get out more instead of spending every Friday night reading Virginia Woolf and working on my thesis about unreliable narrators in modern fiction. The irony of that choice would become apparent much later. The party was at some off-campus house that belonged to a business major whose parents had bought it as an investment property, the kind of casual wealth that made my part-time job at the campus bookstore seem even more pathetic than it already was. Ryan noticed me watching him and smiled, the kind of smile that probably got him everything he wanted without having to ask twice. He made his way across the room with the easy grace of someone accustomed to being welcomed wherever he went, and when he introduced himself, his handshake was firm and warm and lasted just a second longer than necessary. "I haven't seen you around," he said, and there was genuine curiosity in his voice, not the dismissive tone I had expected from someone who clearly moved in different social circles than I did. "I don't get out much," I admitted, which was true. Between classes and work, and trying to maintain the grade point average necessary to keep my academic scholarship, social events had never been a priority. "Well, I'm glad you made an exception tonight," he said, and the way he looked at me made me feel like I was the only person in the room worth talking to. We spent the rest of that evening on the back porch talking about everything and nothing. He told me about his business degree and his plans to work for his father's construction company after graduation. I told him about my literature studies and my dream of maybe teaching high school English someday, if I could figure out how to afford the education classes required for certification. He listened like my modest ambitions were as fascinating as his family's plans for regional expansion. When he asked for my number at the end of the night, I gave it to him even though every rational part of my brain was screaming warnings about boys like him and girls like me. Boys who drove BMWs and belonged to exclusive social organizations had never shown interest in scholarship students who worked retail jobs to pay for textbooks. But Ryan seemed different, seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me rather than just checking off some kind of conquest list. Our first actual date was dinner at Romano's, the nicest restaurant in Millbrook Heights, the kind of place I had walked past hundreds of times but never imagined entering as a customer. Ryan ordered wine without looking at the prices and talked about his family with the casual affection of someone who had never questioned whether he belonged among them. He asked about my background too, and I found myself editing the truth slightly, emphasizing my academic achievements while downplaying the financial struggles that had shaped most of my college experience. The truth was that I had grown up in a tiny apartment above my mother's hair salon in the older part of town, where the houses needed painting, and the cars in the driveways were held together with prayer and creative financing. My mother, Diana Mitchell, had raised me alone after my father decided that responsibility wasn't compatible with his lifestyle choices. She worked 60-hour weeks cutting and coloring hair for other working-class women, saving every possible penny for my college fund, because she believed education was the only reliable ladder out of the life we had always known. Ryan's world was so different from mine that it might as well have been a foreign country. The Coleman family lived in a colonial mansion on Elmwood Drive, where the lawns were maintained by professional services and the cars in the three-car garage were replaced every few years as a matter of course rather than necessity. His mother Linda spent her days organizing charity events and redecorating rooms that already looked perfect, while his father Robert managed a construction business that had built half the developments in 3 counties. But Ryan made me feel like those differences didn't matter. He picked me up for dates in his BMW and never seemed embarrassed to be seen with someone who shopped at discount stores and carried a purse that had been a graduation gift from my mother's friend who worked at the department store. He introduced me to his friends with pride and included me in conversations about topics I knew nothing about, like ski trips and summer houses, and family traditions that went back generations. The first time he brought me home to meet his parents was for Sunday dinner 6 weeks after we started dating. Linda Coleman greeted me at the front door with the kind of polished smile that wealthy women seem to perfect in finishing school, all warmth and charm but somehow hollow underneath. She complimented my dress, which I had bought specifically for this occasion using money from my emergency fund, and asked polite questions about my studies while leading me through rooms that looked like they belonged in a magazine spread. Robert Coleman was more direct in his assessment, asking about my career plans and family background with the business-like efficiency of someone conducting an interview. When I mentioned that my mother owned a hair salon, his expression shifted almost imperceptibly, and I caught him exchanging a glance with his wife that spoke volumes about their expectations for their son's romantic choices. But it was Dorothy Coleman who surprised me most that evening. Ryan's grandmother was visiting for the weekend, and she studied me with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing while asking questions that went deeper than small talk. She wanted to know about the books I was reading, the ideas that excited me, the dreams I harbored for my future. When I mentioned my thesis on unreliable narrators, she leaned forward with genuine interest and asked follow-up questions that proved she was actually listening, rather than just being polite. "Intelligence is such an attractive quality in young people," she said later as we moved to the living room for coffee and dessert. Too many of Ryan's previous girlfriends were lovely but seemed to have cotton between their ears. Ryan laughed and squeezed my hand. "Grandma Dot always speaks her mind." "It's one of the privileges of age, dear," Dorothy replied. "When you've lived as long as I have, you learn not to waste time on pleasantries, when honest observation is more useful." That dinner established the pattern for our relationship over the next 2 years. Ryan's family accepted me with varying degrees of enthusiasm, but they accepted me nonetheless. Linda remained politely distant, treating me with the kind of careful courtesy she might show to any temporary fixture in her son's life. Robert warmed up gradually, particularly after learning that I maintained a perfect grade point average while working part-time, which seemed to earn his respect for my work ethic if not my pedigree. Dorothy, however, became my unlikely champion within the Coleman family hierarchy. She remembered details about my classes and asked thoughtful questions about my job at Grind Coffee House, where I had started working after graduation when my dreams of immediate employment in my field proved unrealistic. She sent birthday cards and included me in family celebrations, with the same consideration she showed Ryan's sister Jessica, who had married into another prominent local family and produced the great-grandchildren that secured her position in the dynasty. Working at Grind Coffee House was supposed to be temporary, a placeholder job while I figured out my next steps and saved money for the education courses I would need to become a certified teacher. The coffee shop was located on Main Street in the renovated downtown district, serving overpriced lattes to business professionals and college students who could afford to spend $5 on beverages I learned to make from YouTube videos and determination. The work itself was simple enough, but dealing with customers who treated service workers as invisible was an education in class dynamics I hadn't anticipated. Ryan's friends would sometimes stop by during my shifts, and watching them interact with me in my apron and visor versus how they treated me at social events was illuminating in ways I tried not to think about too deeply. Ryan himself was always kind when he visited me at work, but I noticed he tended to come by during slower periods, when fewer people would see him dating someone who made their coffee for minimum wage plus tips. He would sit at the corner table and work on his laptop while I cleaned espresso machines and restocked pastry cases, occasionally looking up to smile at me with the fond indulgence of someone watching a child play dress-up. The transition from college to real life had been harder than I expected, My English degree, which had seemed so valuable during 4 years of academic success, turned out to be nearly worthless in a job market that prioritized practical skills over critical thinking abilities. The teaching certification program would cost money I didn't have, and require a time commitment that would mean giving up the income I needed to pay rent on my studio apartment above the vintage clothing store on Maple Street. Ryan was sympathetic to my struggles but unable to truly understand them. When I mentioned the cost of certification courses, he offered to pay for them with the casual generosity of someone who had never had to choose between necessities. When I explained that I couldn't accept such an expensive gift, he seemed genuinely confused by my reluctance to let him solve my problems with his family's money. "It's not like it would be a hardship," he said during one of our conversations about my career uncertainty. "Dad could write a check tomorrow and never notice the expense. You're practically family anyway." But I wasn't family, not really, and accepting financial help felt like crossing a line that would change the fundamental dynamic between us. I was already self-conscious about the differences in our backgrounds, already aware that I brought nothing to the relationship except myself. Taking his money would make me feel like I was being kept rather than loved. Instead, I worked extra shifts and saved every possible penny while trying to figure out a path forward that didn't involve becoming financially dependent on a boyfriend whose family still treated me like a pleasant temporary addition to their social circle. The Coleman family was generous with invitations and gifts, but there was always an underlying sense that my position was conditional, subject to change based on Ryan's continued interest in their assessment of my worthiness. That conditional acceptance became more apparent as our relationship deepened and the possibility of a serious future together began to seem realistic. Linda Coleman started making subtle comments about the importance of shared backgrounds and compatible life goals. Robert began asking more pointed questions about my long-term plans and my family's history in the community. Even Dorothy, who remained warm and welcoming, occasionally made observations about the challenges faced by couples from different social circumstances. The pressure to prove myself worthy of their son intensified over time. I found myself changing small things about my appearance and behavior, learning to navigate their social events with the careful attention of an anthropologist studying an unfamiliar culture. I practiced conversations in the mirror, memorizing topics that would be appropriate for discussion at family dinners and charity fundraisers. I bought clothes I couldn't afford and studied etiquette guides like they were textbooks for a class one couldn't afford to fail. Ryan seemed oblivious to my efforts, or perhaps took them for granted as natural adaptations to his world. He never asked if I was comfortable at his family's events, or whether I felt accepted by his friends. He assumed that access to his lifestyle was its own reward, that I should be grateful for the opportunity to participate in experiences I never could have afforded on my own. But sometime during our second year together, things began to shift in ways I couldn't immediately identify. Ryan started working longer hours at his father's company, staying late for projects that seemed to require an unusual amount of evening and weekend attention. He became less available for the casual dinners and movie nights that had been the foundation of our relationship, replacing them with rushed coffee dates and quick phone calls between meetings. When I mentioned feeling like we weren't spending as much quality time together, he assured me that his increased responsibilities at work were temporary, necessary steps toward the promotion his father had been planning for him. He painted a picture of our future that included marriage and children, and a house in the same neighborhood where he had grown up. A life that would require financial stability and career advancement that demanded sacrifices in the present. I wanted to believe him because the alternative was too painful to consider. I had invested 2 years of my life in learning to love someone whose world had seemed impossible to access, and the thought of losing that connection felt like losing part of my identity. I had shaped myself around his expectations and his family's standards, and the idea of starting over as the person I had been before him seemed overwhelming. But the signs were impossible to ignore forever. Ryan's phone, which had always been casually accessible during our time together, became something he guarded carefully and checked obsessively. He started scheduling work calls during times we had planned to spend together, stepping away to take them in private, while I waited in restaurants or coffee shops or his car. He became vague about his daily activities, offering general explanations about meetings and deadlines without the specific details he had always shared before. The changes were subtle enough that I questioned whether I was being paranoid or overly sensitive. Ryan had always been busy with work and family obligations, and his new responsibilities naturally required more of his time and attention. But my instincts, trained by years of paying attention to the subtle dynamics of social situations where I didn't quite belong, recognized that something fundamental had shifted in his behavior toward me. The discovery happened on a Tuesday evening in late August when we were having dinner at Romano's, the same restaurant where he had taken me on our first date 2 years earlier. Ryan had been unusually attentive that evening, asking about my day at the coffee shop and listening to my stories about difficult customers with more interest than he had shown in weeks. I thought maybe the distance I had been feeling was my imagination, that we were finally returning to the easy companionship that had characterized the early months of our relationship. When his phone buzzed during dessert, he glanced at it automatically and then set it face down on the table between us while continuing our conversation about weekend plans. But the screen remained lit, and from my angle across the table I could see the preview of the message that had just arrived. The sender was listed as B, and the preview text was clearly visible. "Can't wait for tomorrow night. I've been thinking about." The message preview cut off there, but seeing any message that started with those words from someone whose identity Ryan felt the need to disguise was enough to make my stomach drop. I finished my tiramisu and made appropriate responses to his questions about my schedule, but my mind was racing with implications I didn't want to consider. That night I lay awake in my studio apartment staring at the ceiling and trying to convince myself that I was overreacting to an innocent message between friends or colleagues. But the knot in my stomach persisted, and by morning I had acknowledged what I had been refusing to see for weeks. Ryan was hiding something significant from me, and that something almost certainly involved another woman. The next few days passed in a haze of uncertainty and anxiety. I found myself analyzing every interaction between us, looking for signs that would either confirm or dispel my suspicions. Ryan seemed normal, perhaps even more affectionate than usual, but I wondered if I was seeing genuine emotion or performance designed to distract me from noticing other changes in his behavior. Emma Rodriguez had been my closest friend since sophomore year of college, when we were assigned as lab partners in the one science course required for my English degree. She was majoring in computer science with the kind of focused determination that made her, professors predict great things for her future, but she also possessed the kind of practical wisdom that came from growing up as the oldest daughter in a family that had immigrated to Ohio when she was 10 years old. Emma had been skeptical of my relationship with Ryan from the beginning, not because she disliked him personally, but because she recognized the fundamental inequality in our social positions, and worried about how that imbalance might affect me over time. She never criticized him directly, but she asked pointed questions about how I felt in his family's social circle and whether I thought his feelings for me were based on who I actually was, or who he wanted me to become. When I finally confided my suspicions about Ryan's recent behavior, Emma listened without judgment while I explained the changes I had noticed and the message I had glimpsed on his phone. She didn't immediately jump to conclusions or urge me to confront him without evidence, but she also didn't dismiss my concerns as paranoia or suggest that I was imagining problems where none existed. "Trust your instincts," she said when I finished laying out all the circumstantial evidence that had been accumulating over the past month. "You know Ryan better than anyone except his family. If something feels different, there's probably a reason for that feeling." Emma's expertise in technology proved invaluable when I decided I needed more concrete information before deciding how to proceed. She taught me how to recover deleted messages from backup files and how to preserve screenshots in ways that couldn't be detected or easily erased. She also helped me understand the digital footprints that people leave when they're trying to hide their activities, the patterns of behavior that become visible when someone knows what to look for. But she also made sure I understood the implications of what I was considering. "Once you know something for certain, you can't unknow it," she warned me. "And once you have proof, you'll have to decide what to do with that information. Are you prepared for whatever you might find?" I thought I was prepared, but discovering the full extent of Ryan's deception was still devastating in ways I hadn't anticipated. The affair with Brittany Hayes had been going on for 6 months, beginning shortly after she had started working at Murphy's Bar and coinciding almost exactly with the period when Ryan had become distant and distracted in our relationship. Brittany had been my best friend throughout high school, the person I trusted with my secrets and my dreams during the awkward years when we were both trying to figure out who we wanted to become. We had drifted apart during college as our paths diverged, but we still exchanged occasional messages on social media and ran into each other around town with the comfortable familiarity of shared history. Learning that she had been sleeping with my boyfriend while maintaining the pretense of friendship felt like a double betrayal that cut deeper than either individual deception would have alone. The messages between them revealed not just the physical affair, but also conversations where they mocked my attempts to fit into Ryan's social circle, and laughed about my devotion to a relationship they both saw as temporary and ultimately doomed. Reading those conversations was like seeing myself through a funhouse mirror that distorted everything I had believed about my place in Ryan's life. According to his messages to Brittany, my efforts to learn his family's social conventions were try-hard and embarrassing. My work ethic, which I had considered one of my strengths, was described as evidence that I didn't understand how real wealth functioned. Even my physical appearance was subject to casual criticism, compared unfavorably to Brittany's more relaxed style and natural confidence. But what hurt most was reading Ryan's descriptions of our intimate moments together, the private conversations and physical affection that I had thought were expressions of genuine love, but which he presented to Brittany as obligations he endured, while waiting for opportunities to be with her instead. He wrote about our relationship like it was a performance he was giving for his family's benefit, maintaining appearances while pursuing what he really wanted elsewhere. The messages also revealed practical details about their affair that made me feel sick with recognition. The late nights at work corresponded with hotel meetups. The weekend projects for his father's company were actually weekend trips to locations outside Millbrook Heights, where they were unlikely to be recognized. Even some of the family events I had attended included text exchanges with Brittany about how much he wished she were there instead of me. Emma helped me organize the evidence methodically, creating a digital file that documented the timeline of the affair and the specific lies Ryan had told to maintain it. We printed out the most damaging messages and created a backup system that would preserve the information, even if Ryan discovered my investigation and tried to delete the original files. But having proof of the betrayal didn't immediately clarify what I should do with that knowledge. Confronting Ryan privately would likely result in denials, manipulation, and attempts to make me feel guilty for invading his privacy. Ending the relationship quietly would allow him to control the narrative and potentially continue deceiving future girlfriends the same way he had deceived me. The more I thought about Dorothy Coleman's 78th birthday party, scheduled for the following weekend, the more it seemed like the perfect opportunity to reveal Ryan's true character to the people whose opinions mattered most to him. His entire identity was built around his family's approval and his position within their social hierarchy. He had used that status to make me feel grateful for his attention, while treating our relationship as a convenient fiction that allowed him to pursue other interests without consequences. Dorothy Coleman had always treated me with genuine kindness and respect, including me in family traditions, and asking thoughtful questions about my goals and interests. She deserved to know that her grandson was not the honorable man she believed him to be, and Ryan deserved to face consequences for his actions in front of the people whose approval he valued most. Emma understood my reasoning but worried about the potential fallout from such a public confrontation. "Are you sure you want to burn all the bridges at once?" she asked as we finalized the evidence file. "Once you do this, there's no going back to any kind of relationship with his family." But I had already lost that relationship the moment Ryan decided to betray me, while keeping me around as a convenient cover story. The difference was that now I had the power to control how that ending played out, to speak my truth instead of disappearing quietly while he moved on to his next deception. The night before Dorothy's party, I practiced what I would say and how I would say it, rehearsing the key points until I could deliver them calmly and clearly even under pressure. I chose my outfit carefully, selecting the navy blue dress Ryan had complimented at a previous family event, because I wanted to look like the person they had all known me to be, while revealing the person he had never allowed them to see. Standing in my studio apartment that Friday evening, holding my phone with its carefully organized evidence file, I felt nervous, but also strangely free. For 2 years I had shaped myself around other people's expectations, trying to become worthy of acceptance, into a world that had never really intended to include me. Tomorrow I would finally speak as myself, telling the truth that Ryan had worked so hard to hide, and claiming the dignity he had spent months undermining. The girl who had been grateful for scraps of attention and willing to change herself for love was about to disappear forever. In her place would be a woman who refused to accept lies and manipulation, who valued her own worth enough to demand honesty and respect. That transformation felt more important than any relationship I might lose in the process. The morning of Dorothy Coleman's birthday party dawned crisp and clear, the kind of September day that made Ohio autumns famous for their beauty. I woke up in my studio apartment with a strange sense of calm that surprised me, considering what I was planning to do in a few hours. The nervousness I had expected was there, buzzing under my skin like electricity, but it was overshadowed by something else entirely, a crystalline clarity about who I was and what I deserved that felt both foreign and completely natural. Emma arrived at 9 with coffee from the shop downtown and a bag of pastries she had picked up from the bakery near campus. She looked more nervous than I felt, which struck me as both touching and ironic. She had been my anchor throughout this entire process, helping me gather evidence and organize my thoughts, but now that the moment had arrived, she seemed more concerned about the potential consequences than I was. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" she asked for what had to be the dozenth time since I had first told her my plan. "There are other ways to handle the situation, ways that don't involve public humiliation." I sipped my coffee and looked out the window at the tree-lined street below, where normal people were starting normal Saturday mornings without the weight of life-changing decisions hanging over their breakfast. "Emma, I've been publicly humiliated for months, without even knowing it. Ryan and Brittany have been laughing about me behind my back, making jokes about how naive I am, how easy it is to deceive me. The only difference is that today, everyone else will finally see what's really been happening." The evidence file on my laptop had grown substantially over the past week as I had dug deeper into the digital trail Ryan and Brittany had left behind. What had started as suspicious text messages had expanded into a comprehensive documentation of deception that went far beyond simple infidelity. They had created an entire parallel relationship complete with shared social media accounts, hotel loyalty programs, and even a joint savings account for their planned weekend getaways. The joint savings account had been particularly devastating to discover. While I had been working extra shifts to save money for teaching certification courses, Ryan had been funding romantic escapes with another woman using money his parents gave him for what they believed were legitimate business expenses. The irony was brutal. His family's generosity was subsidizing the very behavior that made a mockery of their values and expectations. Emma had helped me trace the financial transactions, her computer science background proving invaluable when it came to understanding digital banking records and credit card statements. We discovered restaurant charges for expensive dinners on nights when Ryan had told me he was working late. We found hotel bookings in cities where he claimed to be attending business conferences that didn't exist. We even uncovered airline tickets for weekend trips that coincided with family events he had asked me to attend alone because he was supposedly too busy with work commitments. The most damaging evidence, however, wasn't financial. It was the social media presence they had carefully constructed around their relationship, while maintaining the fiction of their individual lives. Brittany had created a private Instagram account under a fake name, where she documented their time together with photos and captions that painted their affair as a grand romantic adventure. The account was full of images from hotel rooms and restaurants, candid shots of Ryan looking relaxed and genuinely happy in ways I rarely saw when we were together. Reading through those posts was like discovering an alternate universe, where Ryan was the person I had always hoped he could be, spontaneous, affectionate, fully present in his interactions with another person. The contrast with his behavior toward me was stark and painful. In Brittany's photos, he looked like someone in love. In our relationship, he had become increasingly distant and distracted, going through the motions of romance without any of the genuine emotion. But what struck me most about their social media documentation was how little consideration they had given to the possibility of discovery. They had been careless in ways that suggested either complete confidence in their ability to deceive me or complete indifference to whether I eventually found out. Either possibility was equally insulting and revealing about how little respect they had for my intelligence or my feelings. The fake Instagram account included posts from recent family events I had attended with Ryan, complete with commentary about how difficult it was for him to maintain his charade while wishing he could be open about his real relationship. There were photos taken at his cousin's wedding where I appeared in the background, unaware that my presence was being documented as an obstacle to his happiness rather than a source of it. Even more disturbing were the posts that revealed how thoroughly they had discussed me as a topic of mutual entertainment. Brittany had created what amounted to a running commentary on my attempts to fit into Ryan's social circle, complete with screenshots of my own social media posts that they had apparently been analyzing and mocking for months. My carefully chosen outfits for family events were critiqued for trying too hard. My posts about work achievements were dismissed as desperate attempts to seem impressive. Even my photos with Ryan were dissected for evidence of my supposed desperation to secure a place in his world. Reading those posts felt like being dissected while still alive, having my most vulnerable efforts at belonging examined and found wanting by people who had been pretending to care about me. The cruelty was breathtaking in its casual thoughtlessness, as if my feelings were so irrelevant that they didn't even need to be considered when choosing what to mock or dismiss. Emma had to physically take my laptop away from me when I discovered the Instagram account, because I was spiraling into a dark place that wasn't productive for anyone. She made me tea and sat with me while I processed the full scope of what I had uncovered, the realization that my relationship had been not just a lie but a source of active entertainment for two people who saw me as a figure of fun, rather than a human being deserving of basic respect. "They're going to regret underestimating you," Emma said after I had finished crying and moved into the cold fury that would sustain me through what came next. People who treat others as entertainment usually don't expect their victims to fight back. The planning phase had been methodical and thorough, partly because I wanted to be absolutely certain of my facts, and partly because the act of preparation gave me something constructive to do with the rage that threatened to consume me if I thought too deeply about how completely I had been played. Emma had helped me create multiple backup copies of all the evidence, stored in different locations and formats to ensure that nothing could be deleted or destroyed if Ryan discovered what I knew. We had also researched the legal implications of my planned revelations, wanting to make sure that I wouldn't be exposing myself to lawsuits or other consequences that could make my situation worse instead of better. The messages and financial records I had gathered were all obtained through legitimate means, either from Ryan's careless security practices or from public records that anyone could access with enough patience and determination. The psychological preparation had been more challenging than the technical aspects. I had spent years conditioning myself to seek approval from Ryan and his family, to measure my worth through their acceptance and validation. Breaking that pattern required conscious effort and constant reinforcement of my own value independent of their opinions. Emma had been crucial in this process, reminding me repeatedly that my intelligence, kindness, and integrity were inherent qualities that didn't require external validation to be real and valuable. The week leading up to the party had been surreal in its normalcy from Ryan's perspective. He had continued his usual routine of work, family obligations, and carefully rationed time with me, apparently confident that his deceptions remained undetected. He had even shown unusual enthusiasm about bringing me to his grandmother's birthday celebration, talking about how much Dorothy enjoyed my company and how proud he was to have me as his girlfriend. The cognitive dissonance of listening to him express affection and pride while knowing about his parallel relationship with Brittany was almost overwhelming. Every kind word felt like another layer of manipulation. Every gesture of intimacy felt like a calculated performance designed to maintain my compliance while he pursued his real interests elsewhere. The effort required to respond normally to his attention while planning his exposure was exhausting in ways I hadn't anticipated. Ryan had also been more physically affectionate during that final week, as if sensing some change in my demeanor and trying to reassure himself of my continued devotion. He brought me flowers from the expensive florist downtown and took me to dinner at restaurants we couldn't usually afford, gestures that would have delighted me a month earlier but now felt like bribes or guilt offerings. Everything he did seemed calculated to reinforce my emotional dependence on him while he planned his eventual exit strategy. The night before the party, Ryan had stayed over at my apartment for the first time in weeks, claiming he wanted to spend quality time together before the stress of family obligations consumed his weekend. He was charming and attentive in ways that reminded me of our early dating period, asking about my work and my future plans with apparent genuine interest. He even brought up the possibility of moving in together once he received his expected promotion at his father's company, painting a picture of domestic happiness that might have convinced me if I hadn't known about his secret life with Brittany. Lying next to him that night, listening to him sleep peacefully while I stared at the ceiling, I marveled at his ability to compartmentalize his deceptions so completely. He seemed genuinely untroubled by the contradictions in his behavior, apparently capable of expressing love for me while planning a future with someone else without experiencing any psychological distress from the dishonesty. The casual ease with which he maintained multiple versions of reality was probably the most disturbing aspect of his character that I had discovered. The morning routine we shared before the party was achingly normal on the surface. Ryan made coffee while I showered, and we discussed the day's schedule over breakfast like any couple preparing for a family event. He mentioned that his sister Jessica would be driving down from Cleveland with her husband and children, expressing genuine excitement about seeing his nieces and nephews. He talked about the gift his family had chosen for Dorothy and the elaborate dinner plans his mother had been organizing for weeks. But underneath the domestic normalcy, I was acutely aware of the parallel conversation he was probably having with Brittany through text messages when I wasn't looking. The quick glances at his phone, the subtle changes in expression when certain notifications arrived, the careful way he positioned himself so I couldn't see his screen all told their own story about where his real attention was focused. Getting dressed for the party required careful consideration of multiple factors beyond simple aesthetics. I needed to look appropriate for the formal family celebration Dorothy expected, but I also needed to project confidence and dignity for the confrontation I was planning. The navy blue dress I chose was one Ryan had complimented at previous family events, but more importantly, it made me feel like the person I was becoming, rather than the person I had been trying to be for his approval. Emma had insisted on doing my hair and makeup, claiming she wanted to help but probably motivated by her own nervousness about what I was planning to do. She was gentler than usual as she worked, occasionally stopping to squeeze my shoulder or meet my eyes in the mirror with expressions of support and concern. She didn't try to talk me out of my decision, but she made sure I understood that she would be available afterward for whatever support I might need. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone," she said as she finished the final touches on my appearance. "You're worth more than this entire situation, regardless of how it plays out today." Her words were meant to be comforting, but they highlighted something I was still learning to believe: that my value as a person wasn't contingent on Ryan's treatment of me or his family's acceptance of me. For 2 years, I had measured my worth through their approval, allowing their opinions to shape my sense of self in ways that had made me vulnerable to exactly the kind of manipulation Ryan had practiced. Breaking free from that pattern was harder than gathering evidence or planning confrontations, because it required fundamentally changing how I understood my place in the world. The drive to the Coleman estate felt longer than usual, partly because of my heightened awareness of everything around me, and partly because Ryan was unusually talkative about family dynamics and party expectations. He seemed genuinely excited about celebrating his grandmother's birthday and proud to be including me in such an important family milestone. His enthusiasm would have been touching if I hadn't known it was based on a completely false understanding of our relationship's reality. Ryan also spent considerable time during the drive coaching me on family politics and social expectations, reminding me of various relatives' interests and suggesting topics of conversation that would make good impressions. His advice was kindly meant but felt patronizing in light of what I knew about his real opinions of my social skills. According to his messages with Brittany, my attempts to navigate his family's social conventions were embarrassing displays of desperation, rather than legitimate efforts to build relationships. The irony of receiving social guidance from someone who was actively betraying the trust of everyone who cared about him wasn't lost on me. Ryan was lecturing me about family loyalty and proper behavior while maintaining a secret relationship that violated every principle the Coleman family claimed to value. His hypocrisy was breathtaking in its casual thoughtlessness, as if he genuinely believed that rules and expectations applied only to other people. When we arrived at the Coleman estate, the grounds were already bustling with activity as extended family members gathered for the celebration. Dorothy's children and grandchildren had traveled from various states to honor the family matriarch, and the atmosphere was festive and warm in ways that made my planned revelations feel even more dramatic by contrast. This was exactly the kind of family gathering that Ryan claimed to value, surrounded by people who loved and respected him, and I was about to destroy his standing among them forever. Linda Coleman greeted us at the front door with her usual polished enthusiasm, complimenting my dress and thanking me for the flowers I had brought for Dorothy. She seemed genuinely pleased to see me, expressing appreciation for my participation in family celebrations and asking about my work with the kind of polite interest that suggested she was making an effort to include me, despite our obvious social differences. Her kindness made what I was planning to do more difficult, but it also reinforced my conviction that she deserved to know the truth about her son's character. Robert Coleman was supervising the setup of tables and chairs on the back patio, directing the catering staff with the efficient authority of someone accustomed to managing complex operations. He nodded approvingly when he saw Ryan and me arrive, expressing satisfaction that we were early enough to help with final preparations. His pride in his son's punctuality and consideration was evident, and I wondered how that pride would change once he learned about Ryan's secret life. Dorothy herself was holding court in the formal living room, surrounded by relatives who had come to pay their respects to the family matriarch. She was dressed in her finest outfit, a pale blue dress that matched her eyes and complemented the silver jewelry that had been her signature for decades. When she saw me, her face lit up with genuine pleasure, and she rose from her chair to greet me with the kind of warm embrace she might give to an actual granddaughter. "Sarah, dear, I'm so glad you could join us today," she said, taking my hands in hers and looking at me with the sharp intelligence that had made her such a formidable business partner to her late husband. "Ryan tells me you've been working so hard at that coffee shop. I hope you're not letting work consume all your energy." Her concern was genuine and touching, based on the kind of personal interest she had always shown in my welfare and future prospects. Dorothy had consistently treated me as a valued member of the family rather than a temporary addition to Ryan's social life, and her kindness made my planned revelations more emotionally complex than I had anticipated. But it also reinforced my conviction that she deserved to know the truth about her grandson's behavior, rather than continuing to be deceived by his carefully maintained facade. The early part of the celebration proceeded exactly as such events always did in the Coleman family. Relatives caught up on news and shared stories about their various achievements and challenges. Children ran through the garden while adults sipped cocktails and admired the elaborate decorations Linda had arranged for the occasion. Ryan moved through the gathering with easy confidence, accepting congratulations on his recent promotion and discussing family business matters with the casual authority of someone who had never doubted his place in the dynasty. Watching him perform the role of devoted grandson and successful businessman while carrying on secret text conversations with Brittany was like observing a master class in psychological compartmentalization. He seemed genuinely present and engaged with his family members, expressing appropriate interest in their lives and sharing updates about his own activities, without any visible signs of the stress that maintaining multiple deceptions should have caused. His ability to be completely authentic in his family relationships while being completely dishonest in his romantic relationship was both impressive and deeply disturbing. The moment I had been waiting for came during the formal toast portion of the celebration, when family members were invited to share memories and wishes for Dorothy's continued health and happiness. Ryan had positioned himself near the main table, where Dorothy sat surrounded by her gifts and flowers, and when Linda called for volunteers to speak, he immediately stepped forward with the confident smile of someone who enjoyed being the center of attention. His speech began exactly as I had expected, with warm memories of childhood visits to his grandmother's house and appreciation for the wisdom and guidance she had provided throughout his life. He spoke eloquently about family values and the importance of maintaining traditions across generations, presenting himself as someone who understood and embodied the principles Dorothy had worked so hard to instill in her descendants. The gathered relatives listened with obvious pleasure, proud of the articulate and successful young man Ryan appeared to be. But then his speech took the turn I had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. He began talking about the importance of making mature decisions as he entered the next phase of his life, about the need to align his personal choices with his family's expectations and his own long-term goals. He thanked his parents for their support and guidance, and he thanked Dorothy for serving as an example of integrity and wisdom throughout his life. And then he looked directly at me with an expression of regretful determination that made my stomach drop even, though I had been expecting exactly this moment. "As I think about my future and the kind of life I want to build," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly attentive gathering, "I realized that some relationships that seemed important when I was younger just aren't compatible with the person I'm becoming. The silence that followed was immediate and uncomfortable as family members realized they were about to witness something that should have been handled privately. Linda looked horrified at the prospect of personal drama disrupting her carefully planned celebration. Robert appeared resigned, as if he had been expecting this development, and was simply relieved that Ryan was finally addressing it publicly. Dorothy's expression remained neutral, but her sharp eyes missed nothing as she observed the dynamics unfolding around her birthday table. Ryan continued with the speech I had somehow known was coming, the public dismissal that would allow him to end our relationship, while positioning himself as the mature party making difficult but necessary decisions. He spoke about incompatible backgrounds and different life goals, about the importance of being honest rather than prolonging a situation that wasn't fair to either of us. He managed to sound both regretful and decisive, painting the breakup as evidence of his emotional growth rather than his moral failure. "Sarah's a sweet girl," he said, looking around at his family members with an expression of fond condescension. "But let's be honest, Grandma Dot, she's just not sophisticated enough for our family's standards." That was the moment when everything crystallized into perfect clarity. Ryan had chosen his grandmother's birthday celebration as the venue for his calculated cruelty, using the family gathering as a stage for my humiliation, while positioning himself as the thoughtful grandson making mature decisions. He had planned this speech carefully, timing it for maximum impact while ensuring that I would be surrounded by witnesses to my rejection and unable to respond with anything approaching equal force. But what Ryan hadn't planned for was the possibility that I might have my own revelations to share with his beloved family. What he hadn't considered was that his months of deception had given me access to information that would transform his moment of triumph into something else entirely. What he hadn't anticipated was that the girl he thought he knew so well had become someone completely different while he was busy planning his exit strategy. The champagne flute slipped from my fingers and shattered against the brick patio, the sound sharp and final in the stunned silence that followed his dismissal. 43 pairs of eyes turned toward me with expressions ranging from pity to curiosity, to relief that someone had finally said what they'd all been thinking. The autumn breeze carried the scent of expensive roses and the sound of uncomfortable murmurs from a family that prided itself on handling personal matters with discretion and grace. I should have been devastated, should have fled through the garden gate like the ashamed working-class girl they expected me to be. Instead, I smiled and reached for my phone, feeling the weight of evidence that would change everything they thought they knew about the young man they had been celebrating just moments before. The silence stretched between us like a wire pulled taut, 43 people frozen in various poses of shock and anticipation as I unlocked my phone with steady fingers. Ryan's confident expression was beginning to shift toward uncertainty as he realized that my reaction wasn't following the script he had written in his head. Dorothy sat perfectly still in her birthday chair, her pale blue eyes fixed on my face with the kind of intense focus she probably used during important business negotiations decades ago. "You're absolutely right about being honest, Ryan," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the patio without any trace of the tears or humiliation he had been expecting. "Honesty is so important in families. It's one of the values your grandmother has always emphasized, isn't it?" Linda Coleman made a small gesture toward me, her hostess instincts kicking in as she recognized the potential for disaster at her carefully orchestrated celebration. "Sarah, dear, perhaps we should discuss this privately," she began, but I was already moving closer to the birthday table where Dorothy sat surrounded by her gifts and flowers. "Actually, Mrs. Coleman, I think your family deserves the truth," I replied, scrolling through my phone to find the folder Emma had helped me organize. Especially since Ryan just made such a beautiful speech about maturity and making honest decisions about relationships. Robert Coleman stepped forward from his position near the outdoor bar, his businessman's instincts clearly recognizing that this situation was about to spiral beyond anyone's control. "Sarah, I think what Ryan was trying to say—" "Oh, I understood exactly what Ryan was trying to say," I interrupted, finding the first screenshot I wanted to share. "He was trying to say that I'm not good enough for your family, that I lack sophistication and class, that my background makes me unsuitable for the kind of future he's planning." Ryan's face had gone pale beneath his tan, and he was starting to move toward me with the kind of careful approach someone might use with an unpredictable animal. "Sarah, you're upset, I understand that, but making a scene at Grandma's party isn't going to help anyone." The condescension in his voice was exactly what I had been living with for months, without recognizing it for what it was. Even now, faced with the possibility of exposure, he was trying to manage and manipulate me, trying to paint my reaction as an emotional breakdown rather than a calculated response to his betrayal. "Making a scene?" I repeated, looking around at the gathered family members who were watching our interaction with fascination and growing alarm. "Ryan, you just publicly dumped me at your grandmother's birthday party. You used this family celebration as the stage for your dramatic speech about my inadequacies. I think we're already well into scene territory." Dorothy's voice cut through the tension with the quiet authority that had commanded respect for nearly 8 decades. "Ryan, step back and let the girls speak. Sarah, dear, what is it you want to tell us?" The permission from the family matriarch was all I needed to proceed with what I had been planning for weeks. I turned my phone screen toward the gathered family, making sure Dorothy could see it clearly from her position at the head of the table. "3 weeks ago, I discovered that Ryan has been having an affair," I announced, my voice steady and clear. "Not just a casual fling, but a full relationship complete with romantic getaways, shared financial accounts, and a private social media presence documenting their time together." The explosion of gasps and murmurs was immediate and gratifying. Jessica Coleman, Ryan's sister who had driven down from Cleveland, actually stood up from her chair to get a better view of what was happening. Kevin, the younger brother, had his own phone out and was clearly recording everything for posterity or social media. Several of the extended family members were leaning forward in their seats, straining to hear every word. Ryan's response was predictable and desperate. "That's completely insane. Sarah, you're having some kind of breakdown. There's no affair. This is just..." "With Brittany Hayes," I continued, ignoring his protests. "You remember Brittany, don't you, Mrs. Coleman? She was my best friend in high school. She's the one who works at Murphy's Bar downtown, serving drinks to college students and businessmen looking for a good time." Linda Coleman's perfectly composed expression cracked slightly as she processed this information. The social implications were staggering from her perspective. Her son wasn't just cheating on his girlfriend, he was cheating with someone from an even lower social stratum than the girlfriend he had just publicly rejected for being insufficiently sophisticated. "Show them the first message," I said, holding up my phone so Dorothy could read the screen. This one is from August 15th, sent at 11:47 p.m., while Ryan was supposedly working late on the Henderson construction project. Dorothy took the phone from my hands with steady fingers, adjusting her reading glasses to examine the evidence I was presenting. Her expression remained neutral, but I could see her jaw tighten as she read Ryan's words to his secret girlfriend. "Read it aloud, Grandma Dot," I suggested gently. "I think everyone should hear what Ryan really thinks about honesty and family values." Dorothy's voice was calm and clear as she read the text message that had started my investigation. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow night at the Marriott. Sarah thinks I'm working late on the Henderson project, but the only project I want to work on is getting you out of that dress you wore to Murphy's last night." The silence that followed was profound and devastating. Robert Coleman looked like someone had hit him with a physical blow, his businessman's composure completely shattered by the explicit nature of his son's deception. Linda had gone completely white and was gripping the edge of the nearest table as if she needed physical support to remain upright. Ryan made one more desperate attempt to control the narrative. "Grandma, that's taken completely out of context. Sarah doesn't understand." "Context?" Dorothy's voice carried a steel edge I had never heard before. "Ryan James Coleman, what context makes this acceptable behavior?" I scrolled to the next screenshot on my phone, the one that had hurt me most deeply when I first discovered it. "Here's another message, from September 3rd, the day after your cousin Michael's wedding. The wedding where I spent the entire reception trying to make conversation with your relatives, while you texted your girlfriend about how embarrassing I was." Dorothy read this message aloud as well, her voice growing colder with each word. Sarah was so desperate to fit in tonight. She kept asking questions about family history like she was studying for a test. Brittany, you're so much more natural and comfortable in your own skin. Being with you is like breathing after holding my breath for months. The cruelty of those words landing on the assembled family was exactly what I had hoped for, and more painful than I had anticipated. These people had watched me struggle to belong, had seen my efforts to learn their customs and values, and now they were discovering that Ryan had been mocking those efforts while carrying on with someone else. Jessica Coleman was the first family member to find her voice. "Ryan, how could you do this? How could you bring Sarah to family events while you were cheating on her?" But I wasn't finished with my revelations. The systematic destruction of Ryan's reputation required methodical presentation of evidence, and I had spent weeks preparing for exactly this moment. "The affair has been going on for 6 months," I continued, scrolling through my phone to find the financial records Emma had helped me uncover. "They've taken weekend trips together using money from the account your parents set up for Ryan's business expenses. Hotels in Columbus, Cincinnati, even a long weekend in Chicago that coincided with the conference he told you he was attending for professional development." Robert Coleman's face was turning red as the financial implications became clear. "Ryan, you used company money to fund an affair?" "Dad, I could explain," Ryan began, but Dorothy cut him off with a gesture that commanded immediate silence. "Show me the bank records," she said simply. I had printed out the most damaging financial documents, knowing that not everyone would be able to see phone screens clearly from their positions around the patio. I pulled the papers from my purse and handed them to Dorothy, who spread them out on the table next to her birthday gifts like evidence in a trial. "These are hotel charges from the account Robert and Linda opened for Ryan's professional expenses," I explained as Dorothy examined the documents. "Marriott Downtown, August 15th through 17th. Renaissance Cincinnati, August 29th through 31st. Embassy Suites Chicago, September 12th through 15th. All charged to the business account, all corresponding to weekends, when Ryan told his family he was attending conferences or working on special projects." Linda Coleman found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Ryan, the Chicago trip was for the construction industry conference. You gave us a detailed report about the seminars you attended." "I did attend some seminars," Ryan said weakly, but even he seemed to realize how pathetic his defense sounded. "While your girlfriend documented your romantic getaway on her private Instagram account," I added, pulling up Brittany's secret social media profile on my phone. "She's been posting photos of your trips together, complete with captions about your loving relationship and how difficult it is to keep your romance secret from your judgmental family." The Instagram account was perhaps the most damaging evidence I possessed, because it provided visual proof of Ryan's deception that couldn't be explained away or minimized. Brittany had documented their relationship with the enthusiasm of someone who believed she was living a great romantic adventure, complete with photos from hotel rooms, restaurant dinners, and tourist attractions in the cities where Ryan was supposedly attending business events. Dorothy scrolled through the Instagram posts with the same methodical attention she had given to the text messages and financial records. Each photo told a story of intimate moments and shared experiences that stood in stark contrast to the dutiful but distant relationship Ryan had been maintaining with me. "This photo," Dorothy said, holding up the phone so others could see, "is dated September 12th. The caption reads, 'My love surprised me with a weekend in Chicago. 3 days of just us. No pretending, no hiding. Can't wait until we can be open about our relationship.'" The gathered family members were straining to see the evidence, passing phones and papers between them as the full scope of Ryan's deception became clear. His younger brother Kevin was openly grinning as he watched his golden boy older brother's reputation crumble in real time. Several of the cousins were taking photos of the proceedings, clearly recognizing that they were witnessing family drama that would be discussed for decades. But I still had more evidence to present, and the most devastating revelations were yet to come. The Instagram account had led Emma and me to discover communications between Ryan and Brittany that went far beyond simple infidelity into territory that revealed the depth of his disrespect for me and his family. "The most interesting posts are the ones where they discuss me," I said, taking back my phone and scrolling to find the screenshots I had prepared. "They've been analyzing my behavior at family events, making jokes about my attempts to fit in, placing bets on how long it would take me to figure out what was happening. Dorothy's expression had moved beyond anger into something colder and more final. "Show me." I found the post from Kevin's graduation party in May, where Brittany had written a detailed analysis of my outfit and behavior with commentary from Ryan about my, quote, desperate attempts to seem sophisticated enough for family events. The post included photos of me that had been taken without my knowledge, candid shots that captured moments when I thought I was unobserved. "This is from your grandson Kevin's graduation party," I said, reading directly from the phone screen. Brittany wrote, "Sarah wore that navy dress again, the one she thinks makes her look expensive. She spent the whole party asking questions about family traditions, like she was taking notes for a test. Ryan says she's been researching proper etiquette online, which explains why her conversation sounds so rehearsed." Kevin's graduation party had been one of the few family events where I had felt genuinely welcomed and included. Dorothy had spent significant time talking with me about my career plans, and several other family members had expressed interest in my work at the coffee shop. Discovering that Ryan had been documenting my efforts to connect with his family as material for entertainment with his girlfriend was devastating in ways I was still processing. But the post that had hurt most was the one from Dorothy's previous birthday celebration, exactly 1 year ago, when I had brought homemade cookies as a gift because I couldn't afford something from the expensive stores where the Coleman family usually shopped. "This is from last year's birthday party," I continued, finding the relevant screenshot. Ryan's commentary about my gift. "Sarah brought homemade cookies to Grandma's birthday party. She spent hours making them from scratch because she can't afford real presents." It's actually kind of sweet in a pathetic way. Brittany laughed when I told her, said it was like watching someone try to buy their way into a family with sugar and flour. The impact of those words on Dorothy was visible and immediate. She had praised my cookies enthusiastically last year, asking for the recipe and including them among her favorite gifts. Learning that her grandson had been mocking my heartfelt gesture while accepting her grandmother's grateful appreciation was clearly a betrayal that cut deeper than the sexual infidelity. Linda Coleman was crying openly now, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face as she realized the extent to which her son had been deceiving everyone who cared about him. "Ryan, how could you be so cruel? That girl worked so hard to make those cookies special." But Ryan was beyond caring about his mother's tears or his grandmother's disappointment. His confidence had completely collapsed, and he was now focused entirely on damage control and self-preservation. "This is all being taken out of context," he said desperately, looking around at his family members as if hoping someone would rally to his defense. "Brittany and I, we were just venting about relationship stress. Everyone says things they don't mean when they're frustrated. Relationship stress?" I repeated incredulously. "Ryan, you were cheating on me for 6 months while bringing me to family events and introducing me as your girlfriend. You were using your family's money to fund romantic getaways with another woman, while I worked extra shifts to save money for my education. How exactly is that relationship stress?" Dorothy set down my phone and looked at her grandson with an expression I had never seen on her face before. The disappointment was so profound it seemed to age her before our eyes, transforming her from a dignified elderly woman into someone carrying a crushing burden of disillusionment. "Ryan," she said quietly, "your grandfather and I built this family on principles of honesty, loyalty, and respect for others. We taught your father those values, and he was supposed to teach them to you. Where in your behavior do you see any evidence of the character we tried to instill?" The question hung in the air like an indictment. Ryan looked around at his family members, searching for support or understanding, but found only expressions of shock, disappointment, and anger. His carefully constructed image as the successful and honorable grandson had been completely destroyed, replaced by the reality of someone who was capable of sustained deception and casual cruelty. "Grandma, I made mistakes," he said, his voice cracking with desperation. "But this doesn't define who I am. I can make this right. I can change." "Can you?" Dorothy asked. "Can you change the fact that you've been lying to all of us for months? Can you change the fact that you've been using family resources to betray family values? Can you change the fact that you brought this young woman into our home made her feel welcome and valued, while secretly mocking her efforts to belong. The methodical way Dorothy dismantled his defense was masterful to witness. She wasn't shouting or making emotional appeals. She was simply stating facts and asking questions that highlighted the impossibility of his position. There was no anger in her voice, only a cold assessment of behavior that fell so far short of her expectations that redemption seemed impossible. Robert Coleman finally found his voice, though it was strained with the effort of processing what he had learned about his son. "Ryan, you're suspended from the company indefinitely, effective immediately. Using business funds for personal expenses is embezzlement, regardless of family relationships. Dad, please. And you'll be repaying every penny that was used for those hotel rooms and trips," Robert continued, his businessman's training taking over as he tried to contain the damage to the family's reputation and financial interests. "We'll need a complete audit of your expense accounts to determine the full extent of the misappropriation." The financial consequences seemed almost secondary compared to the social and emotional devastation unfolding around the birthday table. Ryan's entire identity was built on his position within the Coleman family hierarchy, his status as the successful son and beloved grandson who could do no wrong. Watching that identity crumble in real time was satisfying in ways I hadn't expected, and disturbing in ways I hadn't prepared for. "There's more," I said quietly, because the complete truth required one final revelation that would eliminate any possibility of Ryan salvaging his relationship with Brittany as a consolation for losing his family's respect. Dorothy looked at me with resignation, as if she had already absorbed more devastating information than she thought possible, and was steeling herself for whatever came next. "Ryan isn't Brittany's only boyfriend," I said, pulling up the final set of screenshots that Emma had helped me uncover through careful investigation of Brittany's social media connections and dating app activity. She's been seeing at least 2 other men during the same period, including someone from her job at Murphy's Bar. Ryan was never her exclusive partner, just the one with the most money to spend on expensive dates and hotel rooms. The revelation that Ryan had been not just cheating but being cheated on created a ripple of reaction through the assembled family that was almost audible. Several people made involuntary sounds of shock or dark amusement, while others simply stared at Ryan with expressions that mixed pity with contempt. Ryan's face went through a series of transformations as he processed this information. The confident facade gave way to confusion, then to dawning realization, then to something that looked like genuine devastation. For the first time since I had begun my revelations, he looked like someone who understood that he had lost everything and gained nothing in return. "That's not possible," he said weakly. "Brittany and I were planning a future together. She told me she loved me. She told her other boyfriends the same thing," I replied, showing him photos from her dating app profiles that documented relationships with multiple men during the period when she was supposedly devoted to him. "According to her private messages, which she apparently isn't very careful about securing, you were primarily valued for your willingness to pay for expensive experiences that she couldn't afford on her bartender's salary." The final collapse of Ryan's worldview was complete and devastating. He had sacrificed his relationship with me, his standing in his family, and his professional reputation for a woman who had been using him for financial support while maintaining relationships with other men. The romantic adventure he thought he was living had been a transaction, and he had been too blinded by his own ego to recognize the reality of his situation. Dorothy stood up from her birthday chair with the dignity that had defined her entire life, moving slowly but purposefully toward her grandson. When she reached him, she looked up into his face with an expression that somehow managed to convey both profound disappointment and enduring love. "Ryan," she said quietly, "you have broken my heart. Not because you ended a relationship or made poor choices, but because you revealed a character that I don't recognize as belonging to our family. The lies, the cruelty, the callous disregard for other people's feelings. These are not the qualities your grandfather and I worked so hard to instill." Ryan was crying openly now, tears streaming down his face as the full weight of his grandmother's disappointment settled on him. "Grandma, please. I can fix this. I can make it right." "Some things can't be fixed, dear boy," Dorothy replied sadly. "Trust, once broken so completely, is nearly impossible to repair. The respect you've lost today took 24 years to build and moments to destroy." She turned away from him then, walking back to her birthday table where the evidence of his deception lay scattered among her gifts and flowers. The symbolic weight of that image, celebration and betrayal intermingled, seemed to capture everything that had been lost in the space of an hour. The gathered family members sat in stunned silence, processing the complete transformation of their understanding of someone they thought they knew. Ryan Coleman, the golden boy who had never failed to meet expectations, had revealed himself to be capable of sustained deception and breathtaking selfishness. The revelation would reshape family dynamics for years to come, affecting not just Ryan's position but everyone's understanding of trust and character within their social circle. As for me, standing there beside the wreckage of the life I thought I wanted, I felt something I had never experienced before: complete freedom from the need for their approval or acceptance. I had told my truth, shown them exactly who Ryan really was, and claimed my dignity in the process. The girl who had been grateful for scraps of attention was gone forever, replaced by someone who refused to accept lies and manipulation as the price of belonging. The aftermath of my revelations unfolded in slow motion, like watching dominoes fall in a carefully constructed pattern that revealed its design only as each piece toppled into the next. The Coleman family patio, which had been buzzing with celebration just an hour earlier, now felt like the aftermath of a natural disaster, where survivors wandered among the debris trying to comprehend what had just destroyed their familiar world. Linda Coleman was the first to move, rising from her chair with the mechanical precision of someone operating on autopilot while her conscious mind struggled to process reality. She walked past Ryan without looking at him, past the scattered evidence of his deceptions still spread across Dorothy's birthday table, and disappeared into the house through the French doors that led to her pristine kitchen. The sound of those doors closing behind her was soft but final, like the last breath leaving a dying relationship. Robert Coleman remained frozen beside the outdoor bar, his hands gripping the granite countertop so tightly his knuckles had gone white. As a businessman, he understood consequences and damage control, but as a father, he seemed unable to reconcile the son he thought he knew with the evidence of sustained deception and cruelty that lay before him. His eyes moved from Ryan to the financial documents, to Dorothy's disappointed face, calculating losses that went far beyond money. Jessica Coleman had been recording parts of the confrontation on her phone, probably planning to share the drama with friends back in Cleveland, but now she sat staring at her device with an expression of dawning horror, as she realized that her brother's destruction would reflect on the entire family. The social implications were staggering in their small community, where reputation meant everything and scandals followed families for generations. Kevin, the younger brother who had been grinning with delight at Ryan's downfall, now looked uncertain as he processed what this meant for his own future within the family hierarchy. With Ryan's fall from grace, Kevin would inherit expectations and responsibilities he had never wanted, becoming the default heir to a legacy that suddenly felt more burden than privilege. But it was Dorothy's reaction that commanded everyone's attention and would ultimately determine how this family crisis would be resolved. She remained seated at her birthday table, surrounded by the gifts that would forever be associated with the day she learned her beloved grandson was capable of calculated betrayal. Her hands rested quietly in her lap, but her eyes moved continuously between Ryan and me, as if she were solving a complex equation that would determine our collective future. Ryan himself had collapsed into the nearest chair, his usual confidence completely evaporated as he stared at the ruins of his carefully constructed life. The realization that Brittany had been using him while maintaining other relationships seemed to have broken something fundamental in his understanding of himself. He looked like someone waking up from a dream to discover that everything he thought was real had been an elaborate illusion. "Sarah," Dorothy said finally, her voice cutting through the uncomfortable silence that had settled over the gathering. "Would you walk with me in the garden? I think we need to have a conversation away from all this chaos." The request surprised everyone, including me. I had expected anger or dismissal, demands that I leave immediately and never contact the family again. Instead, Dorothy was extending an invitation that suggested she viewed me as separate from the disaster Ryan had created, worthy of private conversation and consideration. We walked slowly through the meticulously maintained garden, where Linda spent hours each week creating the perfect backdrop for family celebrations. The late afternoon sun filtered through the maple trees that were just beginning to show their autumn colors, casting long shadows across pathways that had witnessed decades of Coleman family history. Dorothy moved with the careful grace of someone who understood that time was precious and should never be wasted on unnecessary hurry. "Tell me how you discovered the affair," she said when we were far enough from the patio to speak privately. "The investigation you conducted was quite thorough for someone with no training in such matters." Her tone was conversational rather than accusatory, suggesting genuine curiosity about my methods rather than judgment about my decision to gather evidence. This unexpected response gave me permission to explain the process that had consumed weeks of my life and fundamentally changed my understanding of my own capabilities. "It started with intuition," I admitted, grateful for the opportunity to share the emotional journey with someone who seemed willing to listen without judgment. Ryan's behavior had been changing for months, but I kept convincing myself that I was being paranoid or overly sensitive. When I finally saw one of Brittany's messages on his phone, I realized my instincts had been trying to warn me about something real. Dorothy nodded thoughtfully as if my explanation confirmed something she had already suspected. "Trust your instincts, dear. They're usually more reliable than the stories people tell us about themselves." We continued walking through the garden while I described the investigation process Emma had helped me navigate, the digital detective work that had revealed the full scope of Ryan's deception. Dorothy listened with the focused attention of someone gathering information for important decisions, occasionally asking clarifying questions that demonstrated her sharp understanding of technology and human nature. The financial records were particularly damning, I explained as we paused beside a fountain that had been a wedding gift to Dorothy and her late husband 50 years earlier. Using family money to fund an affair wasn't just betrayal, it was theft from people who trusted him completely. "Robert will handle the financial aspects," Dorothy said firmly. "Ryan will repay every penny with interest, and his access to family accounts will be permanently revoked. But the money is the least important part of what we've lost today." Her distinction between financial and moral consequences revealed the hierarchy of values that had shaped the Coleman family's identity for generations. Money could be recovered and accounts could be balanced, but trust and character were far more valuable and much harder to restore once destroyed. "What I want to understand," Dorothy continued, "is why you chose to expose Ryan publicly, rather than simply ending the relationship quietly. You could have walked away without creating this spectacle." The question went to the heart of my decision-making process, forcing me to articulate motivations that had been more intuitive than analytical. Why had I chosen confrontation over escape, public revelation over private dignity? "Because he was planning to humiliate me publicly," I said, surprised by the anger that still simmered beneath my composed exterior. "His speech today wasn't spontaneous, Mrs. Coleman. He had rehearsed it, planned it, chosen your birthday celebration as the stage for my dismissal. He wanted to make sure I understood my place while positioning himself as the mature party making difficult decisions." Dorothy's expression hardened as she processed this information. "Ryan planned to use my birthday party for his personal drama? He wanted witnesses to his rejection of me," I continued, warming to my theme as I realized how cathartic it was to finally speak these truths aloud. "He wanted your approval for his decision, your validation that I was indeed too unsophisticated for the Coleman family standards. He was using you to legitimize his cruelty." The manipulation of Dorothy's birthday celebration for Ryan's personal agenda was perhaps the most unforgivable aspect of his behavior from her perspective. She had worked for months planning this gathering, bringing together family members from multiple states to honor their shared history and values. Learning that her grandson had viewed her special day as an opportunity for psychological warfare was a betrayal that transcended the romantic drama between Ryan and me. "I see," Dorothy said quietly, and in those two words I heard the sound of final judgment being rendered. "Ryan has always been charming and persuasive, but I never realized he was capable of such calculated manipulation. Today he revealed character flaws that I find deeply disturbing." We walked in companionable silence for several minutes while Dorothy processed everything she had learned, and I tried to understand what my future looked like now that I had burned every bridge to the life I thought I wanted. The Coleman family had been my aspiration for 2 years, representing everything I believed I needed to achieve in order to feel successful and valued. Now that I had deliberately destroyed any possibility of belonging to their world, I felt simultaneously liberated and terrified. "What are your plans now?" Dorothy asked as we completed our circuit of the garden and began walking back toward the house where the rest of the family waited to learn how this crisis would be resolved. "I honestly don't know," I admitted. "I've been so focused on exposing Ryan's deception that I haven't thought much about what comes next. I suppose I'll continue working at the coffee shop while I figure out my next steps." Dorothy stopped walking and turned to face me with an expression that suggested she was about to say something important. "Sarah, I want you to know that Ryan's behavior doesn't reflect how I feel about you personally. You've shown intelligence, integrity, and remarkable courage today. Those are qualities that matter more than background or social sophistication." Her words were generous and unexpected, offering validation I hadn't realized I needed from someone whose opinion had come to matter deeply to me over the past 2 years. But they also highlighted the complexity of my situation. While Dorothy might approve of my character, I would always be connected to the family scandal that had destroyed Ryan's reputation. "I appreciate that, Mrs. Coleman, but I think it's best if I disappear from your family's life completely," I said, trying to spare her the awkwardness of maintaining a relationship with someone who had publicly destroyed her grandson. "What happened today will follow all of us for a long time. The cleanest solution is for me to step away and let you rebuild without reminders of this disaster." "Nonsense," Dorothy said briskly, with the tone of someone accustomed to making decisions and expecting them to be respected. "You're not responsible for the disaster, dear. Ryan created this situation through his own choices and actions. Your only crime was refusing to accept deception quietly." Her determination to separate my actions from Ryan's consequences was touching but complicated. Staying connected to the Coleman family would mean navigating relationships forever shaped by this confrontation. Watching people who had witnessed my public humiliation try to pretend that normal social interactions were still possible. "Besides," Dorothy continued with a slight smile that reminded me of the sharp intelligence that had made her such a formidable business partner to her late husband, "I'm not ready to lose one of the most interesting people to enter this family in decades. Your investigation skills alone make you more valuable than most of my biological grandchildren." The compliment was delivered with enough humor to make me smile despite the emotional exhaustion that was beginning to set in as my adrenaline levels dropped. Dorothy Coleman had a gift for finding lightness in difficult situations without minimizing their seriousness, a skill that probably explained how she had survived decades of family drama and business challenges. When we returned to the patio, the scene had evolved in our absence but remained fundamentally uncomfortable for everyone involved. Linda had returned from the house with a fresh drink, and the kind of forced composure that suggested she had spent our absence crying and reapplying her makeup. Robert was on his phone dealing with what sounded like business crisis management, probably trying to contain the professional damage from Ryan's embezzlement before it affected the company's reputation. Ryan himself looked like someone who had been physically beaten, slumped in his chair with the hollow expression of someone whose entire understanding of reality had been systematically demolished. The discovery that Brittany had been using him while maintaining other relationships seemed to have shattered his ego more completely than losing his family's respect or his professional standing. Jessica and Kevin were engaged in whispered conversation that stopped abruptly when Dorothy and I approached, suggesting they had been discussing the family implications of the scandal and trying to calculate how it would affect their own social standing. The Coleman name carried weight in their community, and Ryan's public disgrace would reflect on all of them regardless of their individual innocence. The extended family members who had traveled for Dorothy's birthday celebration were beginning to gather their belongings and make polite excuses about needing to return home, clearly uncomfortable with remaining at a family event that had devolved into personal crisis management. Several of them approached Dorothy to express their appreciation for the celebration and their hope that the family would weather this difficulty. But their eagerness to leave was obvious and understandable. "I think it's time for me to go as well," I said, recognizing that my continued presence was prolonging everyone's discomfort and preventing the family from beginning their private healing process. "Thank you for listening to me today, Mrs. Coleman. I know this wasn't how you planned to spend your birthday." "Wait," Dorothy said, reaching into her purse and pulling out an envelope that bore my name in her careful handwriting. "I had planned to give this to you privately later, but circumstances have changed our timeline." The envelope was thick and expensive, the kind of stationery Dorothy used for important correspondence. I opened it carefully, unsure what to expect but certain that whatever was inside would be significant, given the day's events. Inside was a check made out to me for an amount that made my breath catch, accompanied by a handwritten letter in Dorothy's distinctive script. The sum was enough to pay for my teaching certification courses and support me while I completed the program, essentially funding the career transition I had been struggling to afford on my coffee shop salary. "Mrs. Coleman, I can't accept this," I said, though my hands trembled as I held the check that represented the difference between dreams deferred and dreams achievable. "This is too generous, especially after everything that's happened today." "The letter explains my reasoning," Dorothy said simply. "Read it when you get home and then decide whether you can accept my gift." The drive back to my apartment felt surreal after the intensity of the afternoon's confrontations. My hands shook slightly as I gripped the steering wheel, adrenaline and emotional exhaustion combining to make even simple tasks feel monumentally difficult. The familiar streets of Millbrook Heights looked different somehow, as if exposing Ryan's deception had altered my relationship with the entire community where his family held such prominent positions. My studio apartment had never felt more like sanctuary than it did that evening as I closed the door behind me and finally allowed myself to process what had happened. The space was small and simple compared to the Coleman estate, but it was entirely mine, shaped by my choices and free from the pressure to conform to someone else's expectations of sophistication or respectability. Emma arrived within an hour of my return, armed with Chinese takeout, and a bottle of wine she claimed was for celebration but which I suspected was actually for emotional support. She had been texting me throughout the afternoon asking for updates, and her relief at seeing me intact was obvious as she examined my face for signs of trauma or regret. "So," she said as we settled on my small couch with our food, "how does it feel to have completely destroyed the life of someone who spent months systematically betraying you?" The question forced me to examine emotions I hadn't yet had time to fully process. How did I feel about Ryan's complete downfall? About the family chaos I had deliberately created? About burning bridges to a world I had spent 2 years trying to enter? "Honestly," I said, surprised by my own answer, "it feels like freedom. Not revenge or satisfaction, just freedom from caring what any of them think about me." Emma nodded, as if my response confirmed something she had hoped to hear. "That's the healthiest reaction you could have. You're not the same person who started dating Ryan 2 years ago." She was right, though I was only beginning to understand the extent of my transformation. The girl who had been grateful for scraps of attention from someone whose family barely tolerated her presence was gone, replaced by someone who refused to accept lies and manipulation as the price of belonging anywhere. Dorothy's letter, which I read after Emma left that evening, provided context for her unexpected generosity that revealed depths of character I hadn't fully appreciated, despite 2 years of interaction. She wrote about recognizing my intelligence and integrity from our first meeting, about her disappointment in Ryan's inability to appreciate what he had, and about her belief that education was the most valuable gift one person could give to another. The letter also contained observations about Ryan's character that suggested Dorothy had been aware of concerning patterns long before today's revelations. She wrote about his tendency toward manipulation and his comfort with deception, qualities she had hoped he would outgrow but which had apparently calcified into permanent character flaws. Her disappointment was profound, but not entirely surprised, which suggested that my revelations had confirmed suspicions she had been harboring, rather than shocking her with completely unexpected information. The most touching part of Dorothy's letter was her explanation of why she wanted to fund my education, despite the family scandal that would forever link us. She wrote about the importance of supporting people who demonstrated the courage to stand up for themselves, about her belief that intelligence and integrity should be rewarded regardless of social circumstances, and about her hope that I would use my education to help other people who found themselves in similar situations. The check represented more than financial support. It was validation of my worth as a person, independent of my relationship with Ryan or my status within the Coleman family social circle. Dorothy was investing in my potential rather than trying to buy my silence or forgiveness, offering me the tools to build a life based on my own choices rather than other people's expectations. The weeks following Dorothy's birthday party brought consequences for everyone involved that rippled through Millbrook Heights social circles like stones thrown into still water. The Coleman family, which had maintained their reputation for discretion and respectability for generations, suddenly found themselves the subject of gossip and speculation that followed them through grocery stores, church services, and business meetings. Ryan's professional downfall was swift and comprehensive. Robert's suspension from the family company became permanent termination when the financial audit revealed additional improprieties beyond the hotel and travel expenses I had exposed. Ryan had been using his position to pad invoices, inflate expense reports, and divert funds for personal use, creating a pattern of embezzlement that went back nearly 2 years. The criminal charges that followed were handled quietly through plea negotiations that required full restitution and community service, but avoided jail time that would have brought even more public attention to the family's crisis. Ryan's business career in Millbrook Heights was effectively over, and his reputation in their social circles was irreparably damaged by revelations that confirmed every negative stereotype about privileged young men who believed rules didn't apply to them. Brittany Hayes faced her own consequences when her juggling of multiple relationships inevitably collapsed under scrutiny. The other men she had been dating discovered each other's existence, leading to confrontations at Murphy's Bar that resulted in her losing her job and becoming persona non grata in the service industry establishments where she had built her social life. Her brief moment as the other woman in a prominent family scandal quickly faded into irrelevance, as attention moved on to fresher gossip. But the most significant changes were happening in my own life as I used Dorothy's gift to enroll in the teaching certification program I had been dreaming about for months. The courses were challenging and rewarding in ways that reminded me why I had fallen in love with education in the first place, offering opportunities to combine my literature background with practical skills for helping young people discover their own intellectual potential. Working with student teachers and observing experienced educators showed me possibilities for my future that went far beyond the limited options I had been considering, while trapped in the cycle of financial insecurity and social climbing that had defined my relationship with Ryan. Teaching offered the chance to make a difference in people's lives, while building a career based on my actual talents and interests, rather than my ability to conform to someone else's expectations. The program also introduced me to a community of educators who valued different qualities than the Coleman family social circle had emphasized. Intelligence, creativity, and commitment to helping others were the measures of worth in this environment, rather than family background, financial resources, or social sophistication. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged somewhere based on who I actually was rather than who I was trying to become. Emma remained my closest friend throughout this transition, providing emotional support and practical advice as I navigated the challenges of changing careers while processing the emotional aftermath of my relationship with Ryan. Her computer science background proved valuable in unexpected ways, as she helped me understand online teaching platforms and educational technology that were becoming increasingly important in modern classrooms. But perhaps the most surprising development was the continuing relationship I maintained with Dorothy Coleman, despite the family scandal that connected us. She insisted on regular coffee meetings, where we discussed my progress in the certification program, my career goals, and her own experiences navigating social challenges throughout her long life. These conversations revealed Dorothy's remarkable wisdom about human nature and relationships, insights gained through decades of observing people's behavior during times of crisis and change. She had survived the Great Depression, World War II, multiple recessions, and countless family dramas, while maintaining her principles and her sense of humor. Her perspective on the current scandal was both practical and philosophical, acknowledging the pain it had caused, while recognizing the opportunities for growth and renewal it had created. Dorothy's support extended beyond emotional encouragement to practical networking that opened doors I never could have accessed on my own. She introduced me to school board members, educational administrators, and community leaders who could influence my career prospects in ways that my academic credentials alone might not have achieved. Her reputation for integrity and sound judgment meant that her recommendations carried weight that could overcome concerns about my connection to the Coleman family scandal. 6 months after the birthday party confrontation, I was hired as a substitute teacher at Millbrook Heights High School, the same institution where I had been a scholarship student just a few years earlier. The irony of returning to my high school as an educator rather than a struggling graduate was not lost on me, especially when I encountered teachers who remembered my academic achievements and expressed pride in my career choice. Teaching, I discovered, utilized skills I had developed through my relationship with Ryan and his family in ways I hadn't anticipated. Learning to read social dynamics, navigate complex personalities, and communicate effectively with people from different backgrounds proved valuable when working with diverse groups of students and parents. The confidence I had gained through confronting Ryan's deception translated into classroom management abilities that impressed experienced educators. The students themselves were revelatory in their honesty and enthusiasm. Unlike the adults in Ryan's social circle who maintained careful facades, teenagers were refreshingly direct about their thoughts and feelings. Working with them reminded me of my own high school experience when education represented possibility and hope rather than the practical necessity it had become during my financial struggles after college. One of my most challenging and rewarding assignments involved teaching a literature unit on unreliable narrators, the same topic I had written about in my college thesis. Helping students understand how authors use narrative perspective to reveal character and create meaning felt like coming full circle from my academic studies to practical application. The discussions we had about truth, deception, and the complexity of human motivation were surprisingly sophisticated and often reminded me of my own recent education in the gap between appearance and reality. The anniversary of Dorothy's birthday party arrived with less drama than I had anticipated. The Coleman family had weathered their crisis and emerged with a clearer understanding of their values and priorities. Ryan had moved to another city to rebuild his life away from the scene of his disgrace, maintaining minimal contact with family members who were still processing their disappointment in his choices. Linda Coleman had found new purpose in volunteer work with organizations that helped victims of domestic abuse and financial fraud, channeling her own experience with deception into advocacy for others, facing similar challenges. Her marriage to Robert had survived the crisis, but required significant work to rebuild trust and communication that had been damaged by their son's betrayal of family values. Robert himself had restructured the family business to include stronger oversight and accountability measures, ensuring that future generations would face more rigorous standards for financial responsibility and ethical behavior. The company had actually grown stronger through the crisis, as clients appreciated the family's commitment to addressing problems directly rather than covering them up. Jessica and Kevin had both benefited from Ryan's removal from the family hierarchy, finding opportunities to contribute in ways that had been overshadowed by their brother's apparent success. Jessica had returned to school to pursue an MBA that would prepare her for leadership roles in the family business, while Kevin had discovered entrepreneurial interests that aligned with his generation's approach to technology and innovation. As for Dorothy herself, she remained the family's moral center and wise counselor, but with a deeper appreciation for the importance of character assessment and the dangers of enabling problematic behavior through misplaced loyalty. Her 79th birthday celebration was smaller and more intimate than the previous year's gathering, focused on family members who had proven their trustworthiness through their responses to crisis, rather than their ability to maintain pleasant facades. I was invited to that celebration not as Ryan's girlfriend but as Dorothy's friend, and someone who had earned a place in the family's extended community through my own actions and character. The invitation felt different than any social event I had attended during my relationship with Ryan, free from the pressure to prove my worthiness or conform to expectations that didn't align with my authentic self. My teaching career continued to develop in directions that surprised and delighted me. The principal at Millbrook Heights High School offered me a full-time position teaching English literature and creative writing, recognizing my ability to connect with students and help them discover their own voices through written expression. The salary was modest compared to what I might have achieved by marrying into the Coleman family, but it represented something more valuable: independence and purpose based on my own efforts and abilities. The creative writing classes became my particular passion as I watched students explore their own stories and develop confidence in their ability to communicate complex ideas and emotions. Many of them came from backgrounds similar to my own, facing financial and social challenges that made academic success feel impossible, despite their natural intelligence and creativity. Helping them navigate these obstacles while pursuing their educational goals felt like the most meaningful work I had ever done. Emma completed her computer science degree, and accepted a position with a technology company that allowed her to work remotely while remaining in Millbrook Heights. Our friendship had deepened through the crisis we had navigated together, and she often joked that her detective skills were being wasted in software development when she clearly had a talent for investigation and analysis that could be applied to more dramatic situations. The vindication I felt about trusting my instincts regarding Ryan's deception extended beyond personal satisfaction to professional confidence that influenced how I approached challenges in teaching and life generally. Learning to trust my own judgment rather than deferring to people who seemed more sophisticated or knowledgeable had been essential for surviving the confrontation with Ryan's family, and that same confidence served me well when dealing with difficult students, demanding parents, and complex institutional politics. The most unexpected outcome of the entire experience was the realization that the life I had been trying to achieve through my relationship with Ryan was far less satisfying than the life I built through my own choices and efforts. The social status and financial security I had envied in the Coleman family came at the cost of authenticity and independence that I wasn't willing to pay. Teaching offered different rewards: the satisfaction of meaningful work, genuine relationships based on mutual respect rather than social climbing, and the freedom to define success according to my own values rather than other people's expectations. 2 years after Dorothy's disastrous birthday party, I received an invitation to her 80th birthday celebration, once again held at the family estate, but with a completely different atmosphere than the gathering that had changed all our lives. This time, I attended as an established member of the community with my own professional identity and social connections, rather than as someone seeking acceptance into a world where I didn't belong. Ryan did not attend this celebration, having built a new life in Denver where he worked for a construction company that had no connection to his family's business. According to Dorothy, he was slowly rebuilding his reputation and had entered therapy to address the character issues that had led to his downfall. She maintained cautious optimism about his potential for growth and redemption, while acknowledging that trust would have to be earned through consistent behavior over many years. The conversation I had with Dorothy at her 80th birthday party focused on my teaching experiences and her own reflections on the lessons learned through family crisis. She expressed pride in my accomplishments and gratitude for the way I had forced the family to confront uncomfortable truths rather than enabling destructive behavior through polite silence. Her support had been crucial for my recovery from the emotional damage of Ryan's betrayal, but even more important was her validation of my decision to prioritize truth over social harmony. "You taught us all something important that day," Dorothy said as we walked through the same garden where we had discussed the aftermath of Ryan's exposure 2 years earlier. "You showed us that character matters more than appearances, that integrity is worth defending even when it's difficult, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to participate in their self-destruction." Her words captured something essential about the transformation we had all experienced through the crisis Ryan's deception had created. What had seemed like a disaster at the time had actually been an opportunity for growth and renewal, forcing everyone involved to examine their values and priorities in ways that ultimately strengthened rather than weakened the relationships that mattered most. Looking back on the journey from that first glimpse of suspicious text messages to my current life as an educator and independent woman, I could trace a clear line of development that had required every difficult step along the way. The courage to investigate uncomfortable suspicions, the determination to gather evidence despite emotional pain, the strength to confront deception publicly despite social consequences, and the wisdom to build a new life based on authentic relationships and meaningful work had all been necessary elements in becoming the person I was meant to be. The girl who had been grateful for scraps of attention from someone who barely respected her was gone forever, replaced by a woman who understood her own worth and refused to accept less than she deserved from anyone. That transformation was worth more than any social status or financial security I might have gained by remaining silent about Ryan's betrayal, and it had led to a life far more satisfying than anything I could have achieved by continuing to shape myself around other people's expectations. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.